Welcome to Andy Decodes. Sit back and enjoy as we dive deeper down into the rabbit hole and into the unknown.
Hello and welcome to tonight's show, which is on an unusual day of a Tuesday, but I've just got to try and fit everyone in, so that's why there's 7 days in a week and not just the two. So welcome, Paul. Thank you for coming back on.
Thank you for having me on here.
Anytime. You are more than welcome. So we're going to be talking, or you're going to be talking about the 1941 UFO crash in Missouri.
That's correct.
Excellent.
That
Do you want
was 6 years before the much more famous Roswell crash?
Yes.
See, we can do math. 1947 Roswell minus 6 years
equals Missouri.
That's all the math we'll be doing for this show, I promise.
Yeah. So, do you want to tell us about it? Because I don't know that much about this one.
Very good. I was born and raised and educated in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. In 1941, that was a town of about 20,000 citizens on the edge of the Mississippi River in the heart of mid-America. And it was a very religious community, and things were going along quite quietly. It's a very sleepy town. And then one night, a citizen reported to the police and the fire department, who were in the same building together in those days, that he just saw a crash just after sundown of some vehicle on his farm. And he saw this fireball rise up. And he raced inside, called for the emergency responders, and they came out that day and found what they expected to find was an airplane crash. The site apparently was not too far from not only one, but two airfields in Cape Girardeau. They weren't quite airports yet. They were pretty crude. They had grass or sod runways, and they couldn't handle traffic after dark. So it was naturally felt that this must have been an airplane crash that landed on their farm. So one of the people that was called to come out to the farm was a Christian minister named William G. Huffman, Sr., a very fine man, but very well thought of. He was home that night, and he said, I got a phone call, and someone associated with the police department, not quite a policeman, picked him up in a unmarked car and drove him out about 12 or 13 miles out to the crash site. And what they found was not an airplane. It was not cylindrical with wings or propellers or struts or an exhaust. Said that to his great surprise, probably just a complete shock, it was round and silver, maybe silver gray, like brushed nickel or something like this. And it was cracked open. This disc had landed in a farm field and was setting the field on fire. And there was debris, metal debris, and a fire going on. And the pastor said, when I got there, there's the Cape Girardeau Fire Department fighting the fire all around the crashed disc, and the police department. And he thinks there was a couple of uniformed military men and a reporter for the paper who was also taking some big speed graphic, old time flash bulb photos for the newspaper.
Yeah.
So that the pastor was asked, could you say some prayers for the dearly departed? He was expecting human beings. What they found in the grass were no human beings, but three small, dead aliens. One was technically
Oh.
still alive, just barely breathing. His chest was barely moving. They were laid
Yeah.
out flat on their backs. And there was a rumor that he heard at the site that somebody had pulled them out of this disc to try to save their life in the dark, although
Yeah.
there may have been the flames illuminating the crash site. So the Reverend said, I said my prayers over this one, and it expired right in front of me, just went completely limp. And these were not beings from this world. It was clear. They had these huge, big round heads, big skulls, big black eyes, tiny little nostril dots, barely a slit for a mouth, no ears, no hair, no tattoos or bling bling or jewelry or anything like that. They seem to have this crinkly, creepy looking either skin or flight suit, or possibly a kind of a molding together of both. And it may have been deeply affected by our oxygen-rich atmosphere, which the creatures from another world were not accustomed to or built for that way. Now, the pastors said, I stood back and watched as two local men propped up one of the dead aliens under the arms and posed for a photograph. And the photographer with the big speed graphic camera didn't use his news camera. He pulled out a little pocket camera, like a brownie camera in those days. It was about so.
Yeah.
And he took a quick snapshot and walked away. Now, he's a distant relative of mine, about as distant as you get, but there was a man named Garland G. Fronebarger, who was known as One Shot Frony. He took pictures of one image, posed you, and then he would walk away. That's his reputation in Cape Girardeau. So was in our family home in Cape Girardeau a long time ago, and my aunt, who just passed away the other day,
sorry.
said that he pulled out, or he said, I recommend you use a little brownie camera, and showed her at the time in the 50s what he used. So this really looks like the main chief suspect that took the photo of the dead alien and walked away. You would think you would have more sense than just take one picture of this historic moment, but he was a bit of a cheapskate, and he liked to save on film, believe it or not. It may be he was down to his last exposure in the role. We don't know. It's a little unfair to say he cheaped out on this one too. So he had this big camera full of pictures he had just taken, and he put the little camera in his pants pocket. Now there became an odd situation, the minister said, in which we were invaded by another force. And this was the American Air Corps that arrived and hemmed in the scene, and all the onlookers and all the police and fire department were rounded up and said, this never happened. You don't know anything about this. If anyone asks, you're not to talk about it. It's a matter of national security. We'll take all the film and the photos anyone has taken and all the notes you've taken and put down all that metallic debris. You're not to be allowed to have souvenirs. And it's just a case of how could the military arrive so quickly? Well, it turns out the sheriff of Cape Girardeau County had a brother who was in the military aerial training program in Sikeston, Missouri, about 35 miles south of Cape Girardeau. They could have easily exchanged phone calls that night. The brother worked in the Air Corps training program, and the two brothers probably exchanged a few calls and sent up a troop of cadets with guns and hemmed in the site. That's how they could have arrived so early. And the pastor said, I was taken off to the side and sworn to secrecy, perhaps even using his Bible, I would assume, and told, this never happened. You're never going to speak of this again. Now, when he got home later that night, must have been between 11 and midnight, he promptly broke that oath and told his family everything. They were deeply concerned because he was all shook up. He'd just seen something that maybe no human, and that was, dead aliens and their craft from another world. So they said, what happened to you? Where have you been? And he said, well, that phone call I got, and he explained the whole story of where he had been. He says, I'm going to tell you this, and I'm never going to speak of it again. And apparently he lived up to his word. He told his wife and kids at that time, and he clammed up, I think, for the rest of his life. He died in 1959. However,
Right.
his wife lived to 1984, and she told the story at last. She was on her deathbed with cancer, and she wanted the story out, and her granddaughter got the story from her and wrote it down, typed it up, and sent it to a UFO investigator. And the story eventually got picked up by others, including Stanton Friedman, Linda Moulton Howe, Ryan Wood, some rather notable UFO researchers in our country. And they came to Cape Girardeau and looked into it. And I kept waiting. Where's a book on this? I'd love to see a book. And all you see is a little paragraph or two in other books. And I got fed up waiting. And I thought, well, I'm a writer. I'm from Cape Girardeau. I'm interested. I'll write it myself. And I did, and it did pretty well in 2016. I wrote a second book, and I put in a little too much stuff that didn't have enough to do with the subject matter. And it got kind of overlooked. And I'm glad now because it just didn't meet my standards. So now I'm redoing the two books together, taking the very best of, correcting a few small mistakes, and adding some new material. And that's where I'm supposed to have this new book called Mo 41, Your Complete Guide to the Missouri 1941 UFO Crash, come out this fall from Argus Books. We'll see if that holds up. The publisher's having a problem right now, but there's an advanced copy over my shoulder. It's in hardback, my first ever book in hardback. So it's a fascinating story, and I think everyone will want to read it if you learn about this subject. The more juicy and exciting it gets, and I can tell you little bits and pieces to further entice you, unless you have a question.
Yeah, I've got two questions for you. Well, first one is from Nickname. She says, thank you for writing the book, Paul. And yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think that comes from all of us, not just Nickname. And the two questions that we have, the first one is from Sober Carper. And he'd like to know, hi, Paul, did anyone who touched the aliens get ill?
That's a very good question. And I have not heard if they did. I began to check the newspapers, which had that kind of local gossip or information in it that someone had been taken ill and hospitalized, because that was the news of the day in Cape Girardeau. And I didn't really find anything too dramatic or telling of someone who was taken ill that might have been at the crash scene, such as a fireman, a policeman, maybe a sheriff's deputy or something like that. I'm not aware of someone who could have. It does seem a little dangerous or dicey to just pick up this alien with your bare hands and hold him up and grin for the cameras, you know. There's an excellent story I don't want to gloss over, because we have some artwork today. The thumbnail photo I sent you. The photographer who took the picture showed up at the minister's house about 2 weeks after the crash and said, here's a copy of this photo I took. I know you were there, and I'm going to give you a copy, and I have other copies. I'm going to hold on to my copy. So he handed a finished photograph of the dead alien propped up, and the minister said he didn't really want it, but he gave it to his son, and they hid it away somewhere. And they would bring it out now and then at family parties and talk about it in hushed tones.
Yeah.
When their grandchildren heard and saw this and got about a dozen glimpses at this mysterious photo of this dead alien, super creepy, being held up for this photograph. Yeah. So,
do you want me to put the picture up, Paul?
Yeah. Why don't we pull that one up there?
Yeah.
That's an artist rendering, a modern artist rendering of the photograph being taken to local farmers or citizens holding up this dead alien under the arms. So that's a pretty good image, I think. Looks pretty authentic, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even know it was an artist version of it. I just thought it was an actual photograph that someone had took.
That would have to be a photograph of someone taking a photograph, though.
Yeah, that messed me up a little bit. So I wasn't 100%. I did mean to ask you before the show, but I forgot. Sorry.
Right. It's very well done, modern computer art rendering. And the man who created this has passed away. And I got permission from the person who got this estate of recreations to put in my new book. So the story goes that the granddaughter saw this photograph so many times, she asked her grandmother in the early 80s, what was that picture? What's this rumored alien story all about? And that's where the granddaughter typed up this letter and came forward, and she's given some interviews. I think she's told all that she knows. And quite honestly, she's not diverted from the story or changed it or altered it or tried to make herself look like the hero in any way. I think that speaks to her credibility. The photograph, she said, was brought out one time in the early 50s for a neighbor who came over. And he said, wow, that's an interesting photograph. I know something about photography. And I've got a friend who's involved in like zoology. Maybe he can tell us who is in this picture, something about this creature. And so he took off with the photograph. And not only did he take off with it, he took off out of town like a week later, and they never saw or heard from him again.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. It turns out that a little research shows that this man was apparently part of Army intelligence during World War II and might have been an intel agent and probably took the picture as a effort to cover all UFO crashes and keep this story muzzled up as much as they could. And so they effectively did for decades, but bits and pieces of the tale keep coming out. I can tell you another if you like.
Yeah, please do. That's fine.
Walter Reynolds was a Cape Girardeau fireman, and he heard this story in the early 2000s about Reverend Huffman's confession about what he saw that night. And he saw it printed up, and he said, I want my family to come together. He had cancer, this fireman named Reynolds, and said, I'm on my deathbed. I'm going to tell you. This story about this minister going to the UFO crash, that story's true. He said, I was there. I was helping to fight the fire and put that out. I saw the crashed disc, the spaceship, and I saw the 3 dead alien bodies. And he says, the whole thing's true. And he said the Army did come in and hem us in and tell us to put everything down. He said they caught me trying to put a little shard of metal from the spaceship crash in my pocket. And they chewed me out, he said, and took it back and warned me not to speak of this, and then kicked him out of the crash site. And he said that he felt pretty sure he was being watched around town in the aftermath to see if he would undertake any acts of revenge. And he felt his phone was tapped. And I did a little research, and it turns out the FBI was quite fond of tapping the phones of any suspect. They skirted the laws very easily in those days. And the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, had a huge, thick book of people they were wiretapping shamelessly under suspicion of some sort of crime. And it was so thick they had to start a new book back in those days. So there was an FBI agent in town in Cape Girardeau. He had just opened up an office in March of 41, about a month and a half before the crash. So the whole story makes sense of why it could be muzzled at the time, and why there's no evidence, physical evidence. We have to scrape together circumstantial evidence and a few accounts from people. And I think it is a credible story. I haven't found anything yet that like this is a bunch of nonsense. I don't get involved personally if I think it's no credibility or a big fat lie. If you can find something, a part of this story you can pick apart, but so far I haven't. I keep finding small clues.
Well, that's a good thing, though, isn't it? That's what you want.
It sure is.
Yeah, because you don't want to be doing all this research and then so many months or years down the line find out it was a massive fake.
Yeah, I can't imagine that being so.
No, I don't know what I'd do with myself, to be honest.
Yeah. I will be the first to admit, hey, the whole thing's faked and I was wrong. But so far, nothing like that has happened.
That's good.
In doing some recent research for this new book, I found something interesting in the newspaper. The reporter at the scene was told, you will not write about this. This will not come out in the press. And I think they may have placed a call to the editor of the paper, the publisher, and re-emphasize that point. So if you look up in the Cape Girardeau newspaper for late April 1941, when it is alleged to have occurred, you won't find anything on any spaceship crash.
Right.
The minister's granddaughter said, our family feels that the crash occurred about a week or so, maybe 8 or 9 days at the most, before the birth of one of the two granddaughters, which was May 3rd. So let's backtrack to late April. And in the Cape Girardeau newspaper, there's an interesting story about an airplane circling over the town one morning.
Yeah.
To stop that story just for a second, in the Roswell case, they gathered up all the hardware and software, the bodies, the debris, and the crashed discs in the New Mexico desert, and they put them on a giant B-52 bomber or something like that, a big bomber airplane, and flew it eventually to Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Worth, Texas, and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Wright-Patterson was the main one in those days. So keeping that story in mind, there just happened to have been a report in the Cape Girardeau paper, I'm discovering, that a B-24 or 25 bomber was seen circling over and over Cape Girardeau on Friday morning, April 25th, about 8 or 9 days before the birth of this little baby, fitting the time frame. And the bomber was most unexpected, and people in Cape Girardeau were all looking up like, what is going on? Are we going to be bombed? And it made no sense, because we're not near any sort of military airport or airbase, I guess you would say. What was this huge airplane doing? There was the Sykeston aerial training program, and they used little tiny 1 or 2 seater planes. This would have dwarfed them. Now, a source at that Sykeston airport reported seeing a huge plane that dwarfed the others that landed one day, and it was given armed guards around this time. And that may be a connection here. Why an airplane would circle over Cape Girardeau in the light of the next morning of a crash? It makes sense. You would be looking for any other debris, any other crash site. You would be looking for any strange activity, and then you would go to where the material was taken. Supposedly, it was all scooped up that night and taken away by these aerial training people who were from Sykeston. So here's a big plane that matches the description circling over and over Cape Girardeau, and then something like that in Sykeston. So that's another clue that I've only recently uncovered, and it fits with the story. And there was a follow-up story a week later in the Cape Girardeau newspaper that said that bomber was from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Guess what? You know where all the UFO and stuff was taken back in the old days. And they claim that, well, the plane was on a mere training exercise. We just took it out for a spin one morning. That's their official cover story for why a huge, expensive airplane that guzzled a lot of fuel was taken all the way from Ohio and just happened to circle around Cape Girardeau and take off. You know, pretty lame. They got to come up with something. The whole thing fits together. And if that is correct, then we can look at the night of Thursday, April 24th, 1941, as the most likely candidate, which makes sense for the crash itself.
Oh, thank you for that. We have got a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Because we're only doing an hour tonight, because you've got other stuff to do straight after this. So there's not going to be a break in today's show. So we're just going to be hitting the questions as and when. Right. So next one is from Car. And he's saying, hey, Paul, did they use a flatbed truck? I'm guessing to remove the debris.
Yeah, that's certainly a strong possibility. There's a very fine author named Linda Wallace, and she looked into the Sykeston angle of this story. And one of the stories she uncovered or was told is that a big old kind of flatbed truck was brought in to haul what they thought was going to be this heavy spaceship. Her sources told her that they got some big brawny men all braced up to lift this spaceship, and it was light as a feather. And you kind of hear that about a few other spaceship stories that you think, oh, this is going to be super heavy, but it's super lightweight material. And so they put it on the back of this flatbed truck. You would assume maybe put a tarp over it and trucked it on down in the countryside where there weren't many witnesses, about 30, 35 miles. I don't think it would have stayed in Sykeston airfield very long. I think the
No.
U.S. Army Air Corps would have gotten that bomber loaded up with the material probably the next day and flew it out of there to Ohio or maybe even Washington, D.C. There had never been a UFO crash, I don't think, in our country up until this point. It was quite unusual and historic.
Yeah.
So the leaders of our country, Franklin Roosevelt, Vice President Henry Wallace, a certain Missouri senator named Harry Truman, and the FBI Director Hoover, they all would have wanted to have seen this thing. So when you're in power, you say, bring it to us. I think they probably flew it there and stashed it there. And that leads to a couple of other interesting stories.
I've got an add-on question for that one. You kind of covered it, but I'll go through it anyway. This is again from Nickname. Then, does Paul know where the recovery took the craft and the bodies?
There's the stories that they came in that night, and I got to believe they came in also in the light of the next day. It's so dark. Running around with flashlights to try to pick this up wouldn't have done. You had to have had a team out there the next morning in the light of day to see everything fully, especially after you've cordoned off the farm. And I've been out in that community. There's nothing fenced in. You can't really fence these things in. They're huge swaths of land with crops growing on them. In late April, they would have been little sprouts coming out of the ground. So there was probably a lot of dirt, and things were picked up and hauled away to Sykeston. Now, there's two different sources that say, I saw 3 dead alien bodies in 3 glass jars hidden, of all places, in a storeroom under the U.S. Capitol in the early 40s. And this matches the Cape Girardeau story completely. One was a cousin to FDR's Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, who said, Hull took me down underneath the Capitol, and we went down all these flights of stairs. He swore me to secrecy, but he told his daughters when he got home, I saw this, and, he doesn't want that story to die out. It's the most amazing thing. He saw these 3 alien, creepy-looking bodies floating around in a fluid in glass jars in this storeroom. He saw the spaceship cut up into sections and a box or 2 of the shrapnel debris. So I got a call one night around New Year's Eve a few years ago from an older gentleman whose father, he said, was part of the FDR administration. Stanley Rice was the man's name. He worked in the Bureau of Statistics for FDR. I looked it up, sure enough. And Mr. Rice was friendly with Cordell Hull. So this gentleman who called said, my father took me under the Capitol after the last day of school in May, late May, and showed me this special storeroom under the Capitol. And we looked at these 3 glass jars with bodies in them, creepy alien bodies, and saw the spacecraft cut into parts. And he said, my father said, oh, this must be some sort of storeroom, and refused to give any sort of explanation for this. They left the room, shut off the light, walked out of there. He said, my dad would not speak of it ever again. But he says, I have that memory. I saw this. I know what happened. They stored it there. And when you think about it, there's the Washington, D.C. regular police. There's the special Capitol Police. There are military liaisons throughout the Capitol building, even to this day, I'm sure. The U.S. Army and Air Corps would have little offices there to get their points of view across to congressmen to get what they want for funding and defense projects and such. So it made a lot of sense, especially when you consider the president, vice president, and director of the FBI, Hoover, and so many others in those days were Freemasons. And Freemasons have this thing, this obsession with the U.S. Capitol building. They feel it was specially designed, maybe by a Mason himself, but that it was a place, maybe even a meeting place. And Masons revere the Capitol. They even put it on their literature on the cover of a Masonic pamphlet that I've seen. It made all the perfect sense in the world. Everything came together to have taken the materials originally and to keep an eye out, a vigil for, are we going to get invaded? Are there more forces coming? Are they going to try to take this from us? So you would stash it somewhere deep down underground, wouldn't you? And try to put a lot of guards around it. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a question for you. Why? I think I asked you before. I can't remember, but I'll ask you again anyway. Why do you think that these alien ships crash? What do you think the cause is?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. Could be pilot error. They're not familiar
Yeah.
with our atmosphere, atmospheric
Yeah.
pressure, our weather fronts. It could have been a strong windstorm, a bolt of thunder or lightning, and possibly even from 100 miles away. And the crippled ship just happened to land in Missouri. There are a number of tales, and I put them in my new book, about gray aliens on farms in Missouri. And it's like your eyes light up when you read some of this stuff. Oh my gosh, these creepy little gray aliens are showing up on farms, possibly for the cattle. We've all heard of cattle mutilations, and it's a pretty grisly subject where they have organs that are surgically removed and the carcasses are just thrown back down on the ground for us to find. And it's most disturbing, but we haven't had any reports like that of human beings being treated in that manner. So we could say that possibly, logically, these alien beings were looking for cattle out in farm country in Cape Girardeau. We had plenty of dairy cows out in those days, and we still do it to this day. A lot of cows. So it's possible they ran into pilot error, weather error, mechanical difficulties. Aliens are not perfect. They're flawed beings just like we are. They're maybe a little more advanced, but they still make mistakes, especially if they're familiar with their world, but they're not familiar with our gravitational forces and electromagnetic forces that control the upper atmosphere, the ionosphere, and the lower atmosphere. So I always just kind of chuckle. I mean, I guess we're expecting aliens to be absolutely perfect and never make mistakes. Sure they can.
Yeah. Yeah. So I never thought of any of that, to be honest with you. Because it's like, anyway, if you're not familiar with the surroundings, then it doesn't matter how good you are at whatever it is you do, you're going to like sit back a little bit.
Look at it this way. Our own pilots are trained, hours and hours of training, to be familiar with what to do in bad weather, mechanical problems, how to deal with our gravitational pull, what to do in all situations, and they still crash. We still have crashes to this day, and we know our planet. So they don't, these aliens don't know our planet, and they're the most logical ones to crash of all, aren't they?
Well, yeah, it make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? Thank you for that. Got another question from Sober Carper. He's asking, are there any rumors of anyone who managed to get away with any bits of the crash?
There are a couple of them. One was a man who said he had some of the debris and he throws people off by trying to tell them it was a crash somewhere else. And that's just a rumor. Somebody put it on an old topics chat board online, a forum for online information. And another story says, my grandparents, this gentleman said, my grandparents owned and farmed the land where the crash occurred. He claimed this, and I can't find anything wrong with this story, even though it's a little scant on details. He said, I went there as an adult because I couldn't get much out of my grandparents. They were still scared to talk. So he flew to Cape Girardeau and he went to the site, found the farm, and he found the man who had bought the farm from his grandparents. And the man said, well, I wasn't told about any crash, but I can tell you this. I went digging in the dirt to put in a cistern, which is like a big tank that you set in the soil to catch rainwater. And you can help water your crops during droughts or water your houseplants or do your laundry, whatever. A cistern is somewhat important to farmers. So he said, when I was digging this, I found these weird strips of metal, these light, thin metal shards that had strange imprints on them, these like hieroglyphic type symbols. He couldn't make out what the symbols were, and he couldn't cut the metal. It seemed like aluminum foil almost, but he couldn't cut these shards, even with very sharp cutting devices he had around on the farm. So that he thought, well, this is terribly strange. He can't bend it or crease it permanently, can't cut it. What is this stuff? He gathered it up in a container and stuck it in the barn. And the man said, I talked to this old farmer and he won't tell me what he did with that debris. So that's another tantalizing story, but kind of a dead end. It could still be out there, or you would think once the government found out this story, they went in and took it by hook or crook.
Yeah.
But,
Send
I'd like to think
someone to
a bank account somewhere.
yeah, say sent another person round to have a look at it, and
Yeah.
they vanished as well.
I wish they
Same
would
with the
find a
photograph.
way, somewhere in a vault or a safe or a safety deposit box in a bank and come up with it nowadays.
Yeah.
And say, here it is.
I know it would be nice for it to come up, wouldn't it? Like any evidence.
Yeah. It's possible that people have tried to do that and got squashed by our government that doesn't want this story out. I think in those days, in 1941, people were very frightened of the idea of aliens when they remember Orson Welles' radio broadcast, War of the Worlds, in which people did hear this fictional story on the radio, thought it was real, and went panicking into the streets with guns. They went searching in New Jersey on Grover's Farm, New Jersey, Grover's Mill, I beg your pardon. And they didn't find anything because they didn't realize this radio broadcast was complete fiction, even though they were told a number of times during the broadcast. But this gave an example to government representatives that this is a story we need to keep covered because we don't need a mass panic on our hands. We don't need a stock market crash or another Great Depression by this upheaval of a very revolutionary piece of news and technology we've got our hands on. So it made sense to cover it up even from the start.
Yeah.
But today they could release it. I think we're ready for it,
Yeah, but I think would we believe it? With the stuff that they've been coming out with lately, would we actually believe anything that they're going to tell us now?
Yeah, unless they produce the hard evidence, it's possible that there'll still be some skeptics because in so many issues, the government has lied to us, haven't they?
Yeah, just sadly. A couple of times.
Oh, yeah, just a little.
Yeah, just a little bit. Still got two more questions. Oh, this was not really a question, but kind of. So this is from can't speak now. Nickname. I swear I've seen an image like that many years ago. Was there fakes around, or did the original ever come out once? So that's in regards to the photograph that I put up. What you sent me. So I'll pop it up again.
The original photograph has never surfaced. However, in 2002 or 3, the Sci-Fi Channel in America, a cable TV network, reproduced for about 2 minutes the Cape Girardeau crash and showed it in a documentary. And so still photos of that reproduction of the alien being held under the arms, that's available. You can Google it and you can find this very realistic looking recreation for that TV show. That's probably what this person is referring to.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And the last one, the last one that we've got at the moment is from Sober Carper again. And he's asking, did anyone mention the size of the craft? But can I add on to that? Did anyone mention the size of the aliens?
The aliens were said to be like 4 feet at most, maybe 3.5 to 4 feet when they were stretched upright. And that seems to be a standard height or size in other gray alien stories. But this is a good question. What was the size of this craft? I'm just guessing, logically, that since the minister and the fireman did not report it as huge, they just said this disc, that it was not a little thing, but it was not a big thing. So medium-sized, maybe the size of the length of a bus or less than that. It wasn't something that really impressed them as, oh, it was very tiny, or, oh, my gosh, it was enormous and towered over us. So I think if it had, they would have said so.
Yeah.
I found a very interesting story when I did some more research this summer. And for this new book is that Harry Truman was the Grand Master Freemason of Missouri and a humble, rather obscure senator at the time. But he may have been at the crash site 5 months before it happened. It turns out he won re-election in November of 1940. And as a Grand Master Freemason, he was obliged to go around to the various Masonic lodges. And he came to the Cape Girardeau area. which was having a bit of a controversy over funding our airfield and turning it into an airport. So he was right in that area inspecting things, where apparently the crash occurred 5 months before it happened. And I thought, if they told Harry at the time, he probably would have said, "Oh, I remember that area just from a few months ago. I was right there." So that's just an amazing coincidence.
But is it a coincidence?
Yeah, I guess
Sorry,
so.
I thought I'd throw that in quickly and just mess it up a little bit. So, are there any other bits of the book you can talk about without giving too much away?
There are. Like you say, you want to let people read the book and find out for themselves. And somebody in Canada sent forth a memo about the Five Eyes program. This was very recently. And he said, I've heard this Five Eyes program was started out and maybe continued as a way to keep their eyes out for reporting UFOs and UFO crashes. This politician wrote this in Canada. Now, I did some research on what is the Five Eyes program. Well, guess what? It was started by President Franklin Roosevelt in the weeks after the Cape Girardeau UFO crash. What a coincidence. It was England, Canada, like Australia, America, one other country slips my mind, maybe France or something, to put together a coalition of nations that would swap intelligence, secret intelligence reports on anything unusual going on in the skies or coming down out of the skies. So what a strange coincidence that FDR felt compelled to put this program together in the weeks after late April 1941, and it was eventually ratified and made official in August of 1941.
Yeah. So was there much air activity after the incident, like the weeks afterwards?
Not that I know of. I would have thought you would have seen some sort of report somewhere, because when your brethren crash and die, don't you send someone out to look into, recovering their bodies? Aliens would come back or want to know what happened and circle around. But you've heard of Colonel Philip Corso, the author of The Day After Roswell?
No, sorry.
No. Okay, he was an older man who worked for President Eisenhower as a colonel, and later I think he rose in rank in the 1950s. And he said the Roswell crash recoveries were studied very carefully by our top scientists, and they came to the conclusion that the alien bodies from the New Mexico desert in 1947 were biorobots, biological cloned robots, like punched out of a mold in a lab or a factory almost, from an alien race, a superior race that made these creatures to go out and do the dirty work of advanced aliens. And I think that's why we would have the same thing in Cape Girardeau. They were identical little creatures, gray, rubbery-like skinny things that were well adapted to their ship. But once the ship cracked open, they perished. And it makes sense that they could have been cloned in a lab somewhere, and that's why they were identical, and that's why aliens never came back for them. There's like plenty more in the store. Who needs these bodies they've recovered? We can't get them back anyway. Might as well not start an incident or make it worse. We'll just go back to the cloning lab and get some more. So that's why it was all expendable.
Yeah, so do you think, just jumping on the grey bit with the cloning, do you think then that when these creatures do crash and die, that when they've cloned, they transfer the consciousness from that one into the next one?
Well, that's certainly possible. I don't know how you would have gotten intelligence unless they were programmed robots.
Yeah,
the robots
pre-programmed.
And we're seeing artificial intelligence starting to creep into our society. We're making headway, unfortunately. And the other day, I saw a film clip of some cheerleaders on a football field here in America. And it was being led by a robot, and he's doing all these frantic dance moves, and the cheerleaders are all dancing around him, and the robot was entirely programmed. There's a programmer working the controls over off to the side, and he was really moving and dancing. It was most impressive. But if we can do that at our crude stage, imagine what advanced aliens can do by creating biorobots to fly around and observe planet Earth, take studies, take samples, possibly, hopefully not human beings, but it starts to make more sense now.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking what you said and the question that I just asked you. If they are AI, artificial intelligence, maybe that is one of the reasons why there have been a few UFO crashes. If something's gone wrong with that humanoid, should we say, and then it has been pilot error, and that's why it's come down.
Yeah, if they're biorobots, maybe they weren't completely trained in what to do in case of mechanical error, or they made a mistake, and that makes it even more plausible that they would crash because they're not the real advanced race that made the biorobots. No. They're just the cloned, programmed slaves. I will point out real quick that one source, and I can't get any confirmation of this, said that in the late 40s, just after the war, a spaceship came down about a mile away from that crash site that I estimate. And these little gray men were walking around a field in Cape Girardeau, and a crowd started to assemble. A policeman showed up and kept the people from these aliens. And this one source said, we went and picked up our buddies and went to the site. We saw these creatures standing around in this field. And it's as if they had come back looking for the crash like 5 years later. It was either 46 or late 45, he said.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember the exact year. And so you're a little late, pal. We already took the evidence long ago. He said the aliens got back in their craft and they just took off. I can't find any confirmation, any story in the newspaper. But again, it would have been something that they would have really put the pressure on not to record and to put this story in the paper. So it's an interesting tale, if true.
Yeah. So I'm just looking, there's a couple of comments in the chat. One of them's from Nickname. She's saying that some UFO crashes are considered gifts.
Yeah, I've heard that theory that maybe they're crashed on purpose and like they don't care. This is an alien advanced race. It's our gift to you. So you'll take it and learn from it. I don't know if that theory is valid. Why would you crash it and wreck it and make a mess of things? Why wouldn't you not just leave it? There is a story, it's got no confirmation, but that in 1942, a year after the Cape Girardeau story, that an intact disc, a craft, was found in Louisiana, and that the government got a hold of that and kept that hushed up as well, that they think it was abandoned and left out in this like country field. And so there's that tale. I don't know if it's valid or not.
She just put Jack Valet said it, that they are gifts. I think that's what she means. There's another one comment in the chat from Warren, and he's saying, are they're meant to be buried in a local graveyard?
I find that one difficult to believe. The government wanted every scrap of evidence, and they supposedly took them all. And remember, in the weeks after, there's two different witnesses now that say they saw the bodies in glass jars in Washington, D.C. So they would have been examined very carefully, and maybe still are with all our latest medical science techniques to study their brains, how they operated and functioned, maybe interacted with the craft. Some feel that they used mental controls to run the craft without even using too many gauges and dials. Although the Cape Girardeau minister said, when I peeked into that craft, I could see in there, and there were gauges, dials, little knobs. He said, I saw a little seat the size of a child's seat at what you would call a flight deck or dashboard or something. He said on the inner ring of the spaceship, there was a silver band, and it had hieroglyphics or symbols that he could not understand inside the craft. So that's an interesting level of detail.
Right. No, sorry, it's my mistake with that. Warren was talking about a different one.
Oh, okay.
We talked about something. It just popped up as we was talking about that, so I thought it was related to that one. I think this is the one from 1987 on a Texas farm. Was that the one that went through the windmill, the wind
Yeah,
turbine?
1897 is an allegation, and there's been a couple of hardcore UFO researchers who looked into that, and they came away saying there's nothing alien there. It's just blown out of proportion. That would have been
Yeah,
Aurora, Texas.
yeah,
It's still an
that's
interesting
it.
subject. I'm still open-minded, but I get a little wary of embracing that one when I hear that these two guys who make a career out of books and TV stuff looked into that tale and said it's not alien. If anything, they felt it was a metal-clad balloon that Fort Worth soldiers were
Yeah,
experimenting with, and it got carried away. The wind literally took it away and slammed into a Texas windmill, and it
yeah,
crashed. But it was not an alien event. And if
yeah.
that
No,
is so, then the Cape Girardeau event would be America's first.
no, I remember watching a documentary about that one in Aurora.
Yeah.
'Cause I remember the wind turbine, and they'd gone in and they was asking the locals and going back to the archives in the local library and that to see who was living there and if anyone knew anything about what was going on.
Supposedly there was a tombstone that was put together for a body that was buried
Yes.
there, and it had a kind of alien craft drawing etched into the tombstone. But some people feel that didn't happen, and naturally that disappeared too. And then they won't let you dig or poke around that cemetery. Kind of
Yeah.
understandably, there's a lot of dead people buried there, and so
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not going to get to the bottom of that one either.
No, it's just never going to find out, are we? Right, with no more questions, is there anything you want to add before we bring this to an end then?
I've never seen a UFO. I've never seen an alien. I find these stories fascinating, but I don't believe everything I hear. I try to cram as much factual information and reasonable stories and a little reasonable speculation to link them in my books. I don't want any wild, crazy conspiracy theories. And so I've gotten a lot of good reviews for my material in the past, like on President Eisenhower and his adventures with UFOs. And now the Nixon-Gleason story that I think we may have discussed on a previous show. That's still available.
Yeah.
But I put lots of sources and resources in that make you sure you're getting your money's worth when you buy one of my books, and it's not just some flimsy thing some clown threw together and all kinds of crazy wild speculation. So I always appreciate folks who put on a good review online, and I'm sure Andy's going to buy 100 copies and give them out to all his friends and everyone who
Definitely.
make that 1,000 copies.
I found pushing it now, Bob.
I would be much more encouraged about our future in this subject if the American Congress and the Pentagon would get together and reveal some things. They started to this summer and then stopped abruptly, and that seems to be at a standstill right now. That other whistleblowers have come forward, but the information hasn't been released, that we are holding and inspecting bodies and crafts in American history, and that there has been contact and communication made between some races and American leadership. And I'm thinking that's all what I've discussed in my books. It's right there. Yep. And if it does come out, I'll be vindicated and justified.
Well, that's it. Premonitions, Paul.
That's right.
That's what it is. What we was talking about before. Won't
that's
mention
right.
it, but
well, we won't mention that one on the air.
No, we'll keep that one until it happens, and I can go.
It has.
I heard that first. Right, I heard that first. Yeah.
We'll leave that as a mystery for your viewers. Yeah. Like, what are they talking about?
Make them want more. That's what it is. Keep them wanting.
Maybe someday we can discuss that in another show if it comes true. But if not, yeah.
It's just one of those, and
we'll just let it go.
You never know. Yeah. Right. I shall let you go because you've got minutes before you need to get going.
That's correct.
So massive thank you for coming on.
All righty. I thank you for having me as a guest. Yes.
Excellent. Anytime, you're more than welcome. So please do let us know when the book does come out.
I'll drop you a line and you can put it on your site.
Yes, yeah. Like I say, if you drop it, I'll put the link on the website, and I'll put it on the Facebook group and on my profile as well, and I'll add it into the show notes on the podcast and YouTube.
That's right.
So anyone watching it back can pick it up from there.
Yeah, and if you want to read my books, they're on Amazon around the world. You can order a copy or many copies, and this latest one is supposed to come out from aargusbooks.com. So there you have it. And like I say, I thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah, more than welcome. And just before you go, we've got them in the chat. You're on Midwest Night Watches on Sunday. You're doing an interview with them.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, so they're both in the chat, Gerald and Jane. So I just wanted to say that anyone, it's 12 p.m. UK time, 12 midnight UK time, 6 p.m. US time. That's correct, isn't it?
I think so.
It's something. It's 6 hours anyway. So yeah, but they're on. You're on with them on Sunday. So right. I'll just put the link up on here now. Wrong one. There we go. So anyone gets a chance to watch it, please do. So that's it. Thank you again, Paul, for coming on. Really appreciate it. And yeah, keep us updated with the book, and hopefully speak to you soon.
All right. Thank you. See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Right. So, sorry, 1 second, guys. So now Paul is gone. He's got another thing to do straight after this. So that's why we're only doing an hour tonight. There is no live stream on Friday, as you guys probably know. But there is one tomorrow night with Amanda Quill, and she's going to be talking about spirit animals. And I'll keep going on about this, but please do watch when I do the Halloween special on the 27th of this month. The weekend following, the day after, we're going to be going back to Cannock. Done a lot of research on this, not me. Well, I've done a little bit, but there's other people in the group that are helping me. I really do appreciate the time and effort that they're putting in for this. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that's going to turn up some stuff. And also, there's a big project coming up in the new year that I'm not going to talk about just yet. It's going to be happening around the end of January between the middle of January and the middle of February. That's one that you don't want to miss. You probably couldn't miss it even if you tried. But I will give you updates on that nearer the time, and once I get stuff organised and everything's put into play. So that's it. Have a great 24 hours. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night, same time, 8 o'clock. Like I said, it's Amanda Quill. We're going to be talking about spirit animals, and I will be we'll be doing the draw for this. So it'll be the cursed pebble of Cannock Rock. The cursed pebble. I really can't speak today. The cursed pebble of Cannock Chase. The Bible I was given whilst at work. Don't ask. That's all you need to know. And the ring that materialised probably just over 12 months ago on the bonnet of my car. I drove from my house, picked the missus up from work, drove home. When I got home, that was sat on the front near the washers for the wipers. So they're the 3 things you're going to get. And additional bonus, you've got the dreaded pine cone of Cannock Chase that will give you nightmares for the rest of ever. So for those that don't know, the question was, what is the name of the pub that the 2 American guys go into in American Werewolf in London? But also, this is for members only. So if you're not a paying member to the YouTube channel, so I'm just reading some of the comments. If you're not a paying member to the YouTube channel, I'm sorry, you can't enter. And just, you can email, I think it's win@andydecodes.com or info@andydecodes.com. Joe will put the email address up in a minute. Oh, Simon's got the evil pine cone. I just want to get rid of all the crap that's probably cursed and giving me bad luck. So yeah, you guys can have it. See if it changes your luck. If anything bad happens, then I'm not being held responsible. So yeah, if you do info@andydecodes.com or you can do canitchase@andydecodes.com. That'll work as well. Or win, or I think enters on there. Yeah, just try everything. So yeah, right. You've got until 8 o'clock tomorrow night for that. Me and Amanda are gonna do the draw for that. I know it's nothing great, but it helps me get rid of some unwanted creepy stuff. Right, so that's it. I will see you tomorrow, 8 p.m. Don't be late, and get your questions ready for Amanda. Take care and goodbye.